phone, if you have not followed us on Instagram, to please follow us at PsyTexas, PsyTexas. And you guys, if you came here, you were already probably on our newsletter. So no worries about that. And then the other thing I'll mention just about sourcing and substances, I say this every time to people, this is not a place to, shoulder tap and ask for some acid. Want to acknowledge that a lot of us have experience here and are probably indulging on the weekends and having healing experiences and recreational experiences, but, these are still Schedule I substances, so we just ask that people honor that and respect this environment. And that goes for just retreats and things like that, to just not peddle your shit and just keep it above board, please. And then if you need to go to the bathroom, no big deal. It's right over there in the corner. I wanted to thank VUCA for hosting us. They're very generous. The people that own this place are very psychedelic friendly, let's put it that way, and that's one of the reasons I approached them in the first place. So I'm really grateful that they allow us to do this here. And we'll be going for like an hour 15, and then they'll be open for questions. So think about some of the questions that you guys have, and Zach will be welcome to answer them. And then we'll have some time afterwards for people to mingle and talk to each other. And then I will say we are recording, so this recording will be on the site website later. So if you do ask a question, know that your voice will be on, record in posterity. That's probably not a big deal for most of the people here, but I'm just mentioning that in case it is. One more thing I will just mention. I don't know if people are familiar with South by Southwest voting, but there's a lot of panels out there that people are voting on because community voting is part of it's 30 to 50% of how panels get chosen for South by. I am proposing a panel about firefighters and psychedelics and psychedelic healing. So if you have the ability to go onto Panel Picker and look at it, it's called Mind on Fire. Several firefighters, a doctor, a 9/11 firefighter, someone here in Austin, Justin Lepre, some of you may know. So I just want to throw that out there. That's my little pitch for today, just to support that. So I'll get that later. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Zach. So I'm just going to read this. Are you okay with that? Over the course of the last 30 years, Zach has found himself in the center of the psychedelic movement with a front row seat to the modern Renaissance, while also having a firsthand knowledge of the historical legacy of counterculture influence on psychedelic healing. After spending many years as a digital marketing expert for some of the world's largest brands, he had a wake-up call 13 years ago that thrust him back into the center of the psychedelic cyclone, thanks to the influence of his primary teacher and mentor, Ram Dass. Since then, he has found his unique voice and method in being able to contribute to the revolutionary new psychedelic movement we find ourselves in. As a health and wellness facilitator, integration coach, guided session therapist, and seeker of all things mystical, Zach has worked with nearly 100 people and one-on-one to help them heal with the assistance of psychedelic medicines. As a teacher, he has taught over 50 people his unique approach to psychedelic studies, safe use, and harm reduction, the history of psychedelics, and how to be a well-rounded, knowledgeable, and safe practitioner. Zach currently hosts the MAPS podcast, which there will be a live edition next month, as mentioned, and has an in-depth knowledge of psychedelic-assisted facilitation, is a trained meditation teacher, a student of Bhakti Yoga, an IFS, internal family systems, enthusiast, and an expert in the history of psychedelic culture and its many methodologies. He is also a facilitator at the Psilocybin Evolution Retreat Center in Negril, Jamaica, and a facilitator at Heroic Path to Light, an Austin-based and theogenic church offering healing retreats to veterans and first responders. I've had the pleasure of working with Zach with Heroic Path to Light, and it's really an honor to learn from him and have him as a mentor. So I'm grateful for that and grateful to hear more from him. Lastly, his first book, Your Extraordinary Mind, Psychedelics in the 21st Century and How to Use Them, will be published by Sounds True in late 2023. Welcome, Zach. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hello, everyone. I don't know if you guys write your own bios like I do. It's generally a really bad idea to write your own bio, right? And if you say you're an expert in anything, it's generally bullshit, right? Like, if you're a self-proclaimed expert in anything, I think you should generally run for the hills, but nonetheless, I hope we can laugh at it. Before we begin, just a couple housekeeping things in addition to the beautiful things that Caitlin said, and thank you for having me. Heroic Path to Light is doing a fundraiser / awareness builder for what they do in their mission. It's on Saturday at 6:30 p.m. in Spicewood at the Music Ranch. If you go to at Heroic Path to Light, go to their Instagram page, you can get tickets for that. And yeah, come and hang out and learn more about what we're all doing up there. It's truly an extraordinary organization and one I'm very, very privileged to work with. And I think I'll be talking about that at some point during the talk tonight. What else? Oh yeah, second, it's in my hand. I teach an online course called the Psychedelic Studies Intensive. We're right in the middle of cohort number 5 right now. But cohort number 6 begins on December 6th and goes through February 1st. And there are cards at the front, and if you use the code SYT, PSYT, at checkout, you can get 10% off. And that 10% goes back to SYT to benefit the work that they do. So in the spirit of Conan O'Brien, yeah. So, yeah, let's all sit up straight for a minute. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, close your eyes. If you're not, that's okay. Just focus a soft gaze towards the front of the room. And find a relaxed alertness to what's happening inside of your body. Settling into the chair that you're in, feeling comfortable. Finding a relaxed alertness in your feet, your knees, your hips, your sacrum. Take note on how you're sitting in the chair and how your breath is aligning with your posture and whether or not you're comfortable. And as you're finding your breath, extend that relaxed alertness and awareness up through your chest, up into your heart space and your heart chakra. And feel that extend into your throat chakra, into that extraordinary voice that each one of us has. And still extending that relaxed alertness and awareness up into your crown chakra. Feeling your breath and the life force coming in through your nose and lighting up your crown chakra and your head and your mind. And the field of awareness that gives way to thoughts, to ideas, to meaning. And as that third eye sort of starts to become a little bit more focused, hopefully you can feel a little sense of awareness and a ball of energy in that third eye. A little sensation of heat there. And let that represent the collective conscience that's in the room tonight. That collective consciousness that unites us all. The truth of togetherness, erasing the illusion of separateness. And just offer a sense of loving awareness to everyone around you, to everything around you, to your body, to the neighbor that's sitting next to you. I am loving awareness. I am living awareness. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. In Caitlin's intro tonight, she said, I'm going to give one of my trademark talks, and these days, I find the talks that I give when I give a long-form talk, they're kind of divided into one camp or another. There's kind of two camps. When I'm at a psychedelic conference, for instance, I have a talk called Psychedelics in the 21st Century and How to Use Them, which is very much a commentary on the movement, past, present, and future, what we can do as a community to, in the words of RuPaul, to not fuck it up. But then when I come and do things like this, or speak at a festival or something, it's a little bit more spiritual in nature. And when I was coming up with the title for this talk tonight, I kind of realized I sort of backed myself into a corner by the Yoga of Psychedelics, which is really a merging of these two ideas, right? And when I submitted the title and description for that talk, I was like, wow, that's pretty lofty, wow. And I was thinking that, others who decided to come, wow, he must really know the Yoga of Psychedelics. Wow. He must really know something. Wow. I don't know if any of you are Ram Dass aficionados in the room, but I start every talk that I give in either camp with a Ram Dass story, and I'm going to do it again. It's kind of like a greatest hit, but I always think it's very appropriate. And if you are a Ram Dass aficionado, you will have heard this somewhere along the line. But so for those of you who have, I apologize. For those of you who haven't, that's okay. In the early 70s, Ram Dass was giving talks all over the country, all around the world really, but primarily in the United States. And in that era of Ram Dass's evolution, he was very, of the times, long gray beard, wearing long white robes, and, the people who were coming to his talks were also of the same ilk and all wearing malas, and hey, we're all really spiritual, right? And we're gonna show it, right? Yeah, and it's a really groovy scene, right? All sitting on the floor, and there's kirtan playing, and it's a pretty far out scene for the time. And he's giving this talk, and presumably talking about some pretty, far out spiritual stuff and psychedelics, of course, and his time spent with his guru named Karoli Baba, and there was a woman in the front row who was wearing kind of a very stiff, kind of 1950s Chanel black suit, and she had kind of on a small leather pillbox hat and a little purse, and she's just there in the front row, just nodding at everything that he said, and just was like, oh wow, yes, that's amazing, wow. And he started to notice her, and he was like, wow, what is she doing there? What is she doing here? 'Cause, these days, right, we're all of different walks of life and styles, and like our external doesn't necessarily matter as much anymore, you know what I mean? But back then it was kind of an us and them culture, and there's presumably this little lady grandmother sitting in the front row, and he sees her nodding and agreeing with everything that he was saying. And he notices her, and he starts to take it up a notch and get into some really far out esoteric stuff. And, she's nodding even more, and he even takes it up a notch and starts talking about tantric orgasms and kundalini awakenings and all this kind of stuff. And she's nodding even more. Oh, yes, amazing. Wow, that's so cool. And then after the talk, she comes up to him and says, oh, yes, Mr. Ram Dass, I just love that talk so much. It was just amazing. It really resonated with everything that you said. And he said, well, how do you know? How do you know how the game is played? And she says, I crochet. And that's the story. For some of you nodding, you've heard the story before, but It's actually really deep because it does, and it still rings true today. I mean, in 1972, I think it really rang true, but it still rings true today, and is especially apropos for the psychedelic movement today. You know, the game is much larger than we think. You know, the psychedelic community no longer belongs to the counterculture. You know, it belongs to people who I never thought would be part of this playing field. It belongs to people who come from all walks of life, even political ideologies. I've even done facilitation work for people in the Hasidic community. So the game is much larger than we all think, and I think the moment that we try to narrow in on who should be part of our community and who shouldn't, and we start kind of getting lost into the illusion of separation, is when we kind of lose the point, we lose the plot, right? So I really thank Ram Dass for that story, and I love opening my talks with it, you know, because and generally speaking, my gift to the world in some ways is words. I'm pretty good with words. I can do some other things too, you know, but I'm pretty good with words. And the problem with words is that they have meaning, right? And sometimes when you associate and you attach meaning to them, it extends into certainty. And, you know, that could be a good thing and it may be a bad thing. But, you know, what I really like to stress about that is, you know, even you guys who are in the audience and externally silent, know that we're all co-creating this together. And anything that I say, you already knew. And anything that you figure out, you've already figured it out, but maybe you forgot. Maybe something inside of you went dormant. And it's a process of reawakening, you know. And if we do it right together, you know, the message is nonverbal. It's in our hearts, and it's in our spirits, and it's in what we decide to take back out to the world, right? And as we really sit and remember and gather in community like this, I think we really come into focus around our interconnectedness, and chipping away at that illusion of separateness and the interconnectedness of the fabric of the cosmos, the universe, of time and space. And it so happens that psychedelics and yoga, and the practice of yoga, are both embodiments of unity, of chipping away at that illusion of separateness. Certainly they can take on forms of, you know, taking a look at your own sort of, you know, move in the game that you're playing at any given moment, and kind of assessing your own predicament. But it really is about, you know, the connectedness, the interconnectedness that we all should and can feel with each other and with the world around us. And both psychedelics and yoga have been practiced for thousands of years by ancient rishis and seers and wise men and shamans and priests and priestesses from every corner of the globe. I mean, yoga, a little bit more specifically, the formal practice of yoga comes from one kind of specific region on the planet, namely India. But we could sort of bend to that, you know, that suspended kind of disbelief. And, you know, I think yoga is more about a spirit and an ideology than it is a formal practice, but nonetheless. And it's been a real joy for myself to kind of arrive at this space and time and recognize the own contradiction in my own story, and how the various paths that I've led as a young acid freak following the Grateful Dead around the country, A young man who was very struck and lost and searching for identity at the loss of his father at the age of 22. A young man who fell into the horrors of substance abuse and experienced the lowest of lows in that capacity of things, including jails and institutions and homelessness. Then a man in his late 20s who kind of had a little bit of awakening and found himself in a pretty successful career as a digital marketer and tech executive and strategist. And then an adult who kind of came head to head with the search for meaning. The search for, wow, is anything I'm doing making sense? Does any of it matter? Do I feel fulfilled? Not accomplished, but do I feel fulfilled? And then that kind of set me on the path that I'm on now. But recognizing the external roles, sometimes they're important kind of things to identify, right? Because our external roles can sometimes be different dances that we play, can be different roles that we take on, little things that we try to see if we like them. We realize we don't like them, so we try something new. And that's really the process of Dharma, right? I mean, Dharma in the West is kind of loosely defined as finding your path and your purpose, right? But the process of Dharma is just as much about trying things that you don't like as it is finding the things that you do like. About the process of elimination, stripping things away. And I was raised by a philosophical materialist who believed that when you die, nothing happens. We're just a body, and our consciousness manifests in our brain, and that's that. And then I like to say I was raised again by a spiritual teacher who was the complete opposite of the spiritual materialist, which I found to be just a beautiful juxtaposition and irony in my own life. It's really trying out kind of different pathways. But the biggest takeaway in that is that all paths lead to the same thing. Whatever you want to call it, that's kind of up to you, and it may take you in a different way to get there. But if you're practicing any path with true sincerity, it'll probably lead you to the same thing, right? The path of psychedelics, right? And, like I said, I really feel like I sort of backed myself into a corner with the name of this talk. But the Yoga of Psychedelics, right? You can kind of go a couple different directions with it. The implication could be yoga. The Yoga of Psychedelics could mean, psychedelics as a practice, right? As a spiritual method. But with that too, kind of comes the other thing too. It's like, are psychedelics inherently made to be a method of repetition? And if so, how much is too much? How do we find that balance? Whereas traditional spiritual practices are pretty much rooted in some kind of daily practice. If you're doing psychedelics daily, you're doing too much. I'm just telling you, right? But how can we find that fine line, right? Because the issue with psychedelics, right? The primary issue with it, as far as a spiritual practice goes, is that you must come down. You have to come down. That is an inescapable truth behind the method of psychedelics, right? And again, turning to Ram Dass, I think Ram Dass is one of the greatest stories of psychedelic integration, because before he went to India in the winter of 1967, before he went to India in the spring of 67, he was living in a gatehouse at Millbrook and doing LSD every single weekend. And this is after 5 or 6 years of doing psychedelics with Tim Leary at Harvard and and all of that. And after 6 years of this, and self-proclaimed like thousands of LSD sessions, he was like, "This method is untenable. You have to come down." And he calls Timothy on the phone, and Timothy, "It doesn't work. It's all bullshit. You have to come down. You're going out there telling people to tune in, turn on, drop out, but it's all bullshit because you have to come down." And then you're your same miserable self over and over again. So he was really frustrated and went to India. And to make a very long story short, he met a man who never came down. He met a man who gave him a new map of consciousness. And the reason that I think that is an appropriate kind of tie-in to psychedelic integration is because from that moment on, Ram Dass didn't stop doing psychedelics, but instead of seeing it as this kind of constant coming up and coming down and coming up and coming down, he saw it as this kind of a lateral move on the same playing field. So if you're already kind of dancing and playing and reveling in spiritual ascension, and you're kind of getting high and really lost in this beautiful path of self-inquiry and self-actualization and all these different things that you can do with your spiritual practices, whether it's the breath work, yoga, meditation, kirtan, mantra, tantra, kundalini, whatever it is, and the list is so much longer today. If we're doing it right, psychedelics should just augment those things. You can just move around on the playing field, at a different place on the chessboard. It doesn't have to be an ascension and this big descension again, and this coming up, oh my God, I'm chasing peak experience, and I'm coming down again. And that is one thing that I think today's movement has really put a tremendous emphasis on in the form of integration, which I think we've really gotten right. It's one thing I really think we've gotten right. But turning back a little bit to talk about this idea of coming down, I mentioned, he met a man, Ram Dass met a man, his name was Neem Karoli Baba. Upon his first meeting with him, the man said, "Yes, give me the yogi medicine, give me the yogi medicine." He was like, "Well, what's that?" And he wanted to try this LSD that he had heard about that all these Western hippies were taking. And he was given LSD, and supposedly it was like 600 or 700 mics of LSD, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. So if you're already there, there's no there to get to, right? There's no there to get to. And, a lot of the great seers and rishis and saints of our time all were kind of in a similar predicament, right? Ramana Maharshi, the great Indian saint of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, he had a near-death experience as a teenager when he was 16 years old, and he was afflicted by a disease. It turned out to be temporary, but he was lying on the floor of his little shack in central India, and he thought he was going to die, and his family thought he was going to die, and he had this out-of-body experience at the age of 16, where he literally left his body and saw himself from a bird's eye view, looking down on his physical body. And at that moment, he realized, oh, the body and the soul are two separate things, that my soul can live on, and that he would spend the rest of his life achieving that realization, being firmly entrenched in that realization, that the soul and the physical vessel are two different things, and I want to stay in that awareness, right? So he stayed in that field of never coming down, right? And if you look, and if you look at all the kind of great traditions around the planet, that our species has kind of put into practice, they all deal with this in some way or another. Some of the, especially the Judeo-Christian religions in modern times have become a little bit dualistic in that God is something outside of ourself, and kind of been really wrapped up in dogma, and there's one way to do it, but the original kind of blueprint for Judeo-Christian religions really wasn't that at all. I am, the kingdom of heaven is within, and things like that. But all of these truths, no matter what they are, they all deal with this fundamental sense, this fundamental truth of mining for answers to suffering. Mining for answers around the push and pull between ego and unity, between love and selfishness, between greed and service, between non-attachment and desire. They all kind of deal with that. And it also turns out that psychedelics are incredible mirrors to look at all of these things as well, right? If you look at the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha talked about, the first one was kind of an encapsulation of the entire human condition, is that we're prone to suffering, right? Birth is suffering, death is suffering, old age is suffering, disease is suffering. Wealth and maintaining wealth is suffering, and he thought that because he was a great prince, and who was, been given all of this, but everything was suffering, right? And the second noble truth was, well, what is the root of that suffering? And that's desire. And the third noble truth was that we must be rid of that desire through non-attachment. And the fourth was, the practice is the Eightfold Path of Yoga, which can, hopefully get us there. And that's a fun practice to revisit now and then, right? But the trap with that practice is if you get hung up on your desires, then you could also get caught in the web of your desire to have less desire, right? And the desire to have less desire. And oh my God, I want to meditate like the Buddha today because I have too much desire. I have too much desire. I'm going to sing 10 Hanuman Chalisas today because I just have too much desire, I need another kind of therapist because I just have too much desire, And, sometimes those things start off as really well-intentioned because the path of self-inquiry and self-actualization is rooted in action, it's rooted in intention. And when you're rooted in action and attention, it can often lead to great outcomes, right? But the point of that is, how hard are we gripping? Are we gripping on too tight? Are we gripping on too tight? So I wanted to talk about yoga for a second, too. The word yoga comes from the word yug, which means unite, unity in Sanskrit. And traditionally speaking, there are 4 types of yoga. And they're important to kind of revisit, I think, now in the context of this talk, because I think it can put you directly in touch with the realities and the realizations of psychedelic epiphanies, of psychedelic realizations, right? And I happen to think, now, please understand, I happen to think there are a couple books that deal with this subject, none of them conclusive. There's a great book called Krishna and the Sky with Diamonds. There's another book called Zigzag Zen. Zigzag Zen deals with Buddhist cultural anthropology, and that perhaps the Buddha was eating little mushrooms found underneath the Bodhi tree. And Krishna in the Sky with Diamonds deals with Vedanta and Vaishnavism, which is a form of Hinduism that, hey, maybe they were also eating little mushrooms that were growing in throughout India at the time too. Again, there's very little evidence that suggests that, but the notions and the dots that we can connect are extraordinary. The 4 different types of yoga are karma yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga, and bhakti yoga. Now, karma yoga is the path of devotion to selfless work, seva. It's the yoga of action. It signifies that one has to devote time and energy to any task and is free from rewards or expectations of that task. You're doing it to serve God and to serve the greater good, not to serve yourself, right? Very noble, right? Jnana yoga, that's the study, that's the intellectual side of yoga, really studying the Vedas and the texts and meditating very deeply on the concepts and the precepts in the Vedas and what we call Lila in Hinduism and things like that. Also very noble. There's an incredible amount of knowledge in the Eastern traditions, and if you really want to study that stuff, it's a worthwhile practice, right? Raja Yoga, which is probably the yoga that we are most familiar with in the West today, because Raja Yoga doesn't really have, basically Raja means like king, means kingly yoga. And from that came the Eightfold Path, which is the third limb of the 8-limb yoga is asana, which we call yoga in the West today, which is moving your body with breath and movement united together to create a spiritual discipline and thus a spiritual ascension if you do it regularly and with enough discipline and sincerity. But the thing about asana is it's just the third step on the Eightfold Path. It's not a yoga, a complete yoga in and of itself, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter. That's not to say if some of you go to an asana class 5 times a week or have a home practice, great, keep doing it. Because I do think that even if you are engaged in even just one of the limbs, if that is purification, if that's meditation, any of those things, or asana, you can still kind of get the karmic benefits of it, right? And bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of love, service, and devotion, right? And bhakti is kind of at the heart of all of these, and none of these yogas are mutually exclusive from another. Many of the great yogis of our time and of times before us practice all of them and didn't really consider themselves to be one or the other. You know what I mean? Sjögal Rinpoche said, real devotion is an unbroken receptivity to the truth. Real devotion is rooted in an awed and reverent gratitude, but one that is lucid, grounded, and intelligent. Right? So when you are engaged in a practice, I think the first step in that is kind of doing an analysis to how it is serving you, right? Is it still serving you in the way that you would like it to? Is it providing you fulfillment? Is it providing you equanimity? Is it getting you to a closer universal truth that puts you in touch with your Dharma? And like I said before, I think psychedelics and the path of psychedelic wisdom and revelation and inquiry through the process of using these medicines really leads us to the same thing if we're doing it right. And part of the reason that I wanted to kind of unite these two fields was that because in the modern psychedelic renaissance that we're kind of seeing today, the field of mental health has become inextricably linked with the field of psychedelics, right? It's probably a really good thing. And there is a certain aspect of that that is again kind of taking out some of the evolutionary context and the evolutionary and transformational approach to these practices, psychedelic plant medicines going back thousands of years, and to yoga, which is kind of can be thought of, psychedelics can be thought of as a yoga as well. And I think it's really important that as a community that we have these discussions, right? That all of the parallel paths that we see happening in the psychedelic movement today can coexist into one singular expression, right? That even if somebody chooses to go to a therapist's office to do a legal psychedelic session, whether it's ketamine or an entheogen or whatever else, and they're going that route of the medicalization legal model that is sort of becoming very well articulated and formed, and the blueprint is really starting to take hold, that they don't lose sight of the evolutionary implications of self-actualization and self-inquiry and what it means to really submit yourself to the idea of transformation, to really give it up to the idea that, wow, okay, many of the things that I've been taught, many of the narratives that I've kind of been told, that I've been telling myself for years and after years, no matter what their origin story is, if they're rooted in trauma or early childhood development or association to a religion or a cult or bad education or good education or having great loving parents, it doesn't really matter. But that you are giving it up and giving way to the open-mindedness and the open-heartedness that everything you know is up for grabs and can be reassessed. I don't necessarily like the phrase everything you know is wrong, everything we know is wrong, because I don't necessarily believe that to be true, because I do believe each one of us has an inner knowing, a deep, deep inner knowing that is really resonant with a universal truth that is not only beneficial to ourselves and to others. But I think going into the spirit of psychedelic healing, I think it's best met with you're giving it all up to spirit, you know? You're giving it all up to spirit. Fuck it, leave it all at the table, right? Come in with nothing, with no agenda. Come in with pure emptiness. Pure emptiness. Much like you would if you went to, a Vipassana retreat, right? Or if you went to a Zen monastery in Cambodia or Vietnam or anywhere like that, they would say, you're pure emptiness. Nothingness. Be in nothingness. Because when you are in nothingness and when you're truly free of your own agendas that are trying to drive the cosmic bus, you will be met with resistance. At some point or another. Maybe you won't at first, Maybe you can go into the psychedelic experience with, a very razor-sharp intention and it's rooted in the best intentions and of healing and wellness, and you're driving that bus and it leads to a tremendous realization. But I think in the long run, and coming back to the idea of psychedelics as a yoga, as a practice, in the long run, if you kind of increase that quotient of emptiness and that quotient of being in nothingness and being with the universal, infinite blueprint of nature, of that connectivity that is around all plants and sentient beings and stardust and universal energy and perfect wholeness, love, and infinite wisdom, is when you achieve the real magic, right? Is when you achieve the real transformational properties of these little gifts that have been left for us around, I like to think that, it's complicated. I don't know. Sometimes I go back to the idea that psychedelic plants especially have been intentionally left for us as little portals into the divine, into little portals that are there if you truly want to access universal source code, right? That doesn't mean that you can't get there without them. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that sometimes I think that whatever it is that you choose to call God or the perfection of wisdom or the perfection of love and intelligence left these little nuggets of wisdom for us as ways of discovering the truth about ourselves, our species, and our progress as a interconnectedness, connective species, And certainly, I think, for those of you who do plant medicines, right, you can have a tremendous sense of feeling, a tremendous sense of belonging and love and purpose. But you can also have a tremendous oh shit, wow, what are we doing? What are we doing? We seem to be incapable in large numbers to live in harmony and equanimity with the world around us. As far as we know, the only case studies of true utopian realizations and examples have been in very small numbers. The second it gets to be too large, things happen. power dynamics start to happen. Superiority starts to take over. There's a great, it was kind of ironic, but it was an Ernest Hemingway quote I came across today. It said, true nobility isn't superiority over other men. True nobility is superiority over your former self. And then again, Ernest Hemingway, killed himself, but not to put a downer on it, but nonetheless. And I think that is a tremendous kind of responsibility to, and it's an acceptance and it's a responsibility of taking in the world around us and coming into full acceptance of truth, of the reality of not just your predicament, but all of our predicaments. Is it true that if everybody who did plant medicines would suddenly become climate change aware and our behaviors would be different and fossil fuel extractions would reduce? Maybe not, I don't know, but I certainly think it wouldn't hurt, right? These are all difficult conversations, and I certainly don't think psychedelics are a panacea for anything. But I also don't believe that every single person at any given time are good candidates for the psychedelic work. It may be that someone might be a good psychedelic candidate for psychedelic work, but not at this moment. Maybe they need to do something else first. Or when the Ukrainian war popped off, someone asked me, do you think it would help Vladimir Putin if he did mushrooms? And yeah, I don't think so. I think he's probably too far gone, and it would probably only exacerbate his sense of ego and superiority and disconnection from reality, right? So there certainly is a point, to where, these things aren't saviors, but they can put us in touch with some kind of supreme reality or supreme cognitive dissonance, one or the other. But the actions and the intentions behind the actions are really where we start, right? Both as psychonauts, as teachers, as healers, as interconnected people who are doing work in this community. The intention that guides our actions is the most important aspect of the action, right? So that moment where you are sitting down on the meditation cushion and okay, I'm going to meditate today and engage in something that is going to better my well-being. That's the moment. That is the moment of transformation. That is the moment of action. That's the moment where we can rest in the idea that we've put forth effort and we've put forth some kind of karmic shift that can put us face to face with what it is that we need to do better as individuals and as a society, right? Now, these are all great ideas in practice, right? They really are. And I have certainly found that there has been, especially with psychedelic use, when I was younger, first doing psychedelics, and I mean, late teenage years, following the Grateful Dead around the country, doing copious amounts of LSD with a nitrous tank in the middle of the room and things like that, not recommended, that it was easier to navigate those far out extraterrestrial terrains and kind of loftier goals of where psychedelic consciousness could take me because I didn't have as much of a multi-tiered, multifaceted sense of ego. I didn't have as much of a relationship to my own traumas. I didn't have as much life history to really go on, so it was really just like 0 to 100, shoot for the moon, go. Now, all of these years later, I find that, deep psychedelic work, it's really, really difficult work. It's really, really hard stuff. The ego, it's such an intricate web of all our different identities, past, present, and future, even the future projection of self, how you are in the world, all of your attachments, even that you've given up, right? All those attachments that you have given up and that perhaps you're like, oh shit, I've given them up. Man, maybe I need them back, Because you're really clinging to familiarity. The ego really, really likes to grab on to the familiar, right? And in the psychedelic experience, we're really asked to, especially in higher doses, we're really asked to let go of the grasp of our familiarity and the grasp of our ego and just float with the flow of consciousness that's being presented to us, right? And that language that I chose is very deliberate, that flow of consciousness that is being presented to us. That's very specific. If you die, do you think consciousness ceases to exist? Probably not, right? Now, I have no idea what consciousness is, but I don't think it's an embodied imprint within, this fatty tissue between my ears right now. I think it is a much larger stream of information, of data, of love, of intelligence, of all of these different ideas that we can tap into. So when you are just floating and surrendering to that stream of consciousness that is being presented to you, not in the grip of your ego, trying to control the outcome, is when you can really reveal the veils that shroud your perception of what's holding you back, right? Now, I don't know about you guys, but in one form or another, right, the things that I find in spiritual practice that come up over and over and over again fall into one of three categories. Now, they may be very nuanced examples of one of these three categories, but they're kind of one of these three categories. Self-limiting belief systems. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I've somehow lost my sense of confidence. There are other people who are doing it better. Therefore, I will just choose to stay in neutral, something like that, perhaps. Or wrestling with the idea of self-actualization versus the state you're in upgrading your current version of where you're at now, right? So how do you self-actualize when you are in a spot of upgrading your current version of being alive, your current version of self, right? And the trap with that is, well, yeah, I don't know who this version of, Zach version 49.4 is right now. And until I figure that out, I can't do X, Y, Z, right? And that can become kind of a whole spiral of stuckness, right? A whole spiral of stuckness. And I think the medicines and the spiritual practices and the yogas can all show us a degree of perfection with our own incarnation, and a perfection with our own brand of uniqueness and our offering at any given moment in time, right? And that's, in simple terms, that's what we call getting out of our own way, right? I mean, that was the very long, fancy answer for saying getting out of your own way, right? But getting out of your own way so you can do your dharma, so you can fulfill your dharma and fulfill your purpose. I have had countless experiences in the psychedelic space that have hit me head on with the color, shape, face, style, and actual blueprint for what my Dharma is. And then 3 months later, I'm like, oh, fuck, that's too much. I can't do it. Can't do it. Too much, can't do it. You know? But it's still a good thing. It's still a good thing to have the realization and to have the blueprint and to be gifted the vision for your own life's purpose, right? And whether or not you can execute it, whether or not I can execute it, you know, that's more of a work in progress, you know? But it kind of comes back to that, you know, the kind of the classic conundrum. Is it better to feel sad and despair and depressed and hopeless, or to not feel at all? It's the former, right? It's better to feel sad, hopeless, full of fear than to not feel at all. I think so, for sure. It's better to feel. It's better to have these polarity of experiences inside of our human meat suit than to have a very limited sphere of emotions, right? And you know, the lens that I come through that with is substance abuse, right? You know, my trip around substance abuse, right? My whole thing around it was like, I didn't want to die. It wasn't a death trip, but I didn't want to live, fully live, you know? So I just stayed in neutral, you know, stayed in this place of, oh, being alive, but I was off the grid, you know, just tuned out. You know, and that was one of the great things that psychedelic plants showed me in relationship to that, was like, wow, that is what you're doing. That is the trap. That is your version of stuckness. That is Zach's version of stuckness. Is getting wrapped up in the idea of not being good enough, so I'm not going to feel at all. And when you do psychedelics and have those kind of realizations, I think it's like this beautiful, beautiful projection of the movie of yourself. You know, the movie of me being presented in, I mean, what's after 4K? I don't know what's after 4K. Let's say 3-dimensional 8K or something, right? And panoramic vision with 3D goggles on, and you just see that vision of yourself and the life that you're leading just being projected onto your eyelids with spirit hovering over you, telling you, like, this is the way forward. Do you want to go forward? Hold my hand. I'll take you there, right? I think, you know, this whole thread of the last 40 minutes or so started off with a little bit of entryway and commentary on the medicalization movement, right? And the idea of coming into psychedelic healing and medicines, no matter what venue or context that you were doing them with. And I wanted to talk about the medicalization movement and psychedelic assisted ... whatever it is, fill in the blank, with that kind of starry-eyed, kind of new age wacko approach to it, because I think it's really, really important that we don't lose sight of the original blueprint of why these medicines were gifted to us in the first place. You know? Of why they were left to us in the first place, right? Of course, it's a wonderful thing that the mental health system is being completely reinvented before our very eyes, and we're seeing people get help and have breakthroughs that they never before were even dreamed possible, right? But if we forget as our culture and as our community what these blueprints for these spirit molecules are, and how we are to use them to talk with each other, to talk with ourselves, and to talk with spirit, and to come back into a harmonious relationship with the blueprint of nature, then I think we've kind of lost the message, right? If we're going to sit around and to say psychedelic assisted therapy is only for depression, you know, and, you know, or whatever it is, you know, and really get too myopic on the singular applications of how these medicines can be used, I think we've lost sort of the macro beauty of the whole movement. So, and that's why I bring it up, because while I do think that there's been some incredible discussion around the micro applications of how these medicines can be used for very specific conditions or disorders or disharmonies or dis-eases, whatever it is that we want to call them, realizing that that is just one small slice of their potential is it's a really important thing to do. And in preparing for this talk too, I kind of I revisited some of the work of our original luminaries of the 20th century psychedelic movement. Terence McKenna wrote a book called The Archaic Revival, which deals primarily with the issue of psychedelics being an access point to the blueprint of nature, right? But the subtext, the subtitle for the book is Speculations on Psychedelic Mushrooms, the Amazon, Virtual Reality, UFOs, Evolution, Shamanism, the Rebirth of the Goddess, and the End of History. Holy fuck, right? That's in 1992, talking about virtual reality and UFOs and evolution and shamanism, right? John C. Lilly, the godfather of basically the guy who really discovered that ketamine had psychedelic properties at lower doses, was also the inventor of the isolation tank, of the flotation tank, and also pioneered interspecies communication with dolphins, right? Ram Dass, certainly one of the earliest psychedelic luminaries, is now more known for being, a spiritual teacher and the author of Be Here Now and things like that. Anyway, the point of me saying that was, these early luminaries really had a grasp on the totality of the psychedelic movement and how it could inform every aspect of the world around us. Technology, UFOs, other methods for attaining connection, like flotation tanks. Stan Grof pioneered holotropic breathwork, as another modality for getting to that place, right? And I think those are really important footnotes to bring up, and ones that I don't really hear talked about too often in today's movement, right? So, I think we're kind of getting a little bit short on time, but so I guess I just really encourage us all to, stay in touch with the infinite, with the impossible, with the loftiest of all achievable or even unachievable goals. What is it like to be fully self-actualized, even if you don't get there in this lifetime? It's still a beautiful dance to play with within the medicine space, right? What's it like to contemplate the evolution of the Homo sapien? What is Homo sapien 2.0 going to look like, right? Can we sketch that out in the psychedelic space? How can we evolve and complement our spiritual practice, our regular daily spiritual practice, using psychedelics? Are they hindering or are they benefiting our spiritual practice, right? And are psychedelics in and of themselves a spiritual practice, right? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but you do have to come down. And if you do come down, fortunately, there's a lot of people out there, beautifully, beautifully exquisite human beings, can really help you assign meaning and a pragmatic resonance, a pragmatic sense of wonder to that experience that you just had. So the coming down isn't so drastic. We call that integration today. And integration is that. It's the taking meaning from your experience and turning that into a pragmatic blueprint that can benefit your life on an ongoing basis. So, with that, let's, questions, answers? No answers. No answers. There are no answers.
Hello. Thank you for the talk.
Yeah, thank you.
So you've brought up sort of this juxtaposition of the medicalization, the medical use of psychedelics to treat pathologies, and then on the other hand, let's call it the use of psychedelics for spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. My question is, to what degree do you think of those as being potentially two sides of the same coin? And, to elaborate on that, it's not unrealistic, or it's not unreasonable to think that a widespread feeling of isolation that maybe our society has fostered is at the root of some of these mental health crises. And so tapping into a sense of interconnection could be the salve that it takes to solve that. But on the other hand, the pursuit of these deeper questions that can be very profound and earth-shattering around the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality, those can also be quite destabilizing from a mental health standpoint. So it's kind of an open-ended question, but just do you have any thoughts on that? What's your response to that?
Yeah, for sure. And to one of those points too, we are seeing a collective sense of angst around things like isolation and loneliness that I think have taken on their new versions of those conditions right now that are becoming kind of a global epidemic. And what do we do about it? How do we talk about it? And can psychedelics help those things? But to kind of answer that question, I think even if you are going into doing psychedelic work for a specific pathology, I think you're going to get through it through a psycho-spiritual lens. I do think even the transformation that you go into, say, for PTSD, I think you're coming through at the other end because you have some kind of spiritual shift in your relationship to the PTSD, to the origin story around the PTSD, to how it fits within your life. So I am of the opinion that the transformative properties of these medicines, even in specific pathologies, they're spiritual in nature. Maybe we don't call them that, but they're not symptomatic in nature. It's not about treating the symptom. It's about allowing space for a transformation to occur that I do believe is mystical in nature. So I think even if you are going into it for one reason, you're coming out of it another and through another way. So it kind of just depends on what you call it, I guess. But
thank you. I'll just add that I like your explanation a lot because there's a really common debate right now around, is it the subjective experiences or is it some sort of neurobiology that's at the root of the, why these psychedelics are so effective. But even if it is the quote unquote psychoplastogens just working their neuroplasticity, there's still, embedded in that this idea that you are reassigning meaning.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't come through in a trippy, subjective experience.
Absolutely. And, and to that end, too, I've become a little bit less fascinated with the idea of trying to figure out why these medicines are working, even though we've had so much amazing research. And look, I just went through a week in my course of going through Robin Carhart Harris fMRI studies and stuff like that. I'm like, this is fascinating. It really is. But kind of at the end, I'm like, I'm okay with the mystery. I don't necessarily need it to have it explained to me, I don't know. I go back and forth with it, but I think so.
Hi, Zach.
Hey.
You interchangeably, somewhat through your sharing, use the words both psychedelic and plant medicine. And I'd love to invite you to wax poetic on potentially the differences between the golden nuggets that Source has left in nature and the golden nugget portals that are discovered and in a laboratory.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. And as I vape and this is not an answer to the question, but around the vaping. But when I first started doing facilitation work, Ram Dass was still around, and he told me two things: one, shine like the Buddha; two, never be phony holy. So I never tried to hide. I vape; it's not good for me, but I'm not going to hide it. So no, it's a good question. There's no question that like the plant medicines, ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, peyote, et cetera, there's a certain element to them that I do believe that the human story is baked into their DNA, right? Somewhere down the line, every single person in this room has an ancestral connection to an ancestor that used psychedelic plants. It might have been a longer ago than some of us, but somewhere down the line you have a connection to that. And because of that, there is a sense of like, when you're deep in that space and those plant medicines, we're like, oh shit, I've seen this before. Wow. Some of my story is in there. And there's a tremendous healing from looking at ancestral trauma, ancestral connections, and kind of the story of us within those, right? And that gives those medicines, I think, a special little place in our vernacular. But I do sometimes think that mankind stumbles into the spirit molecule and gets it right. Maybe it was by accident, but it doesn't matter. We got it right. Both LSD and MDMA were not created for psychotherapeutic or revelatory purposes at all. That was not on the agenda. But we invented them anyway, and a bicycle ride later in 1943, and thanks to Sasha Shulgin, a few years and 50 years later, we've discovered that, these little spirit molecules, I believe God speaks through us. God speaks through our creations, through our ingenuity, through our creativity, and does leave us little doorways into that. And that's what those medicines are. And we are writing the history of them now. So our ancestors, should we make it from, thousands of years from now, we will have direct stories and past oral history through the MDMA work, through the LSD work, even though they're less than a century old, So I think we're writing their histories now, and they have equal sort of significance in the story.
Hey, Zach.
Hi.
Hey, thank you for the wonderful talk. I was thinking about, for myself, I was a longtime practitioner of yogic practices, meditative practices for years before I found my way to psychedelics, and thinking about it enhancing my spiritual practice and connection to the infinite, to the impossible. I was thinking about a book that Mircea Eliade wrote about yoga, and he said it's the practice of immortality and freedom. And now in my work, I'm a trauma therapist. I do some psychedelic work with people. I do a lot of integration, and I can't help but think about how much immortality and freedom are part of that psycho-spiritual transformation. They are part of healing. Those words carry a lot of weight, especially freedom and choosing, finding new ways to live, new habits. And so I wanted to just share that and see if you have thoughts on just, in your own perspective, how much immortality or connection to the infinite and freedom in particular are part of psychedelics as a yogic practice.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, where my mind directly goes to that is both my practice, spiritual practice, is rooted in bhakti yoga, and it's just the method that has resonated with me the most. Both bhakti yoga and psychedelic work have in common for me the idea, I guess, sort of in a baseline word, what we call reincarnation, in a sense, in kind of immortality in a way, that our soul is separate from our meat suit, and that the concepts of old age, disease, and death, and immortality, and our spirit living on is really just an energetic recycling of matter and energy and thoughts and emotions, and it just kind of carries over into another realm. I mean, the yogis call death maha samadhi, which is, you could achieve samadhi in a waking state through meditation and tapasya, but maha samadhi, the great samadhi, is death. That's the transformation into the final bardo, And I do think, psychedelics can while very scary, seeing death straight at the eye, looking at it straight head on in the psychedelic space, say in the DMT space, the tryptamine family. It's a scary proposition, no doubt, but if it's not scaring you, you're not doing it right. So yeah, I do think all those threads are linked together. Yeah.
Hey,
Hey there.
what I'm curious about, trying to articulate this the best. I'm curious for you how you define a line between like healing and what some people might call recreational, and where the line is there and what that means for you. And what I'll share is like, I know there are many people who some mushrooms around a campfire may actually lead to like their biggest healing breakthrough, maybe even more than a facilitated guided session sometimes. And it might be that for someone else, the guided session is the thing that leads to that huge healing breakthrough. Or for one person, it might be like a ceremony in the jungle with ayahuasca, but someone else might be on like 3 tabs of acid at Burning Man and have a very similar experience dancing to some music. And so I'm just curious how you view what people typically call quote unquote recreational use and how that integrates into what you think is one's own healthy psychedelic practice.
Oh, thank you for that. It's a great question. And yeah, first I'll start off speaking for myself. Some of my best experiences ever in this space have been at LSD and 10 feet in front of Jerry Garcia, just I got it all there. There was nothing else. I could hang up the phone, pure samadhi, abso-fucking-lutely, and context is everything, and the story of the psychedelic evolution is really an important thing to talk about in answering this question, because the reason there's been so much separation between the two, recreational use and assisted ... is because of the mission of, say, an organization like MAPS, who I work for. It's very much about, hey, let's show that these medicines can be used safely in a very structured container, and that they are safe, and that, and that in order to do that, it had to distance itself away from the recreational use. But I think that was only sort of like a product of necessity. It wasn't a product of actuality or of reality. Everyone I know in the psychedelic space uses psychedelics recreationally. Everyone. I mean, I was at Psychedelic Science, and there were some panelists, Colorado, talking about Prop 122 and about the very strict parameters for how it's going to roll out. And then that night, they're all doing like MDMA mushroom gummies at Flaming Lips, and I was like, what the fuck, really? Okay. So does Prop 122 apply to you here, right? And it's just, there are baby steps. We have to go about this very methodically. But I will say, as a practitioner and an advocate, and whatever it is I do, I don't really know, but that recreational use can be one of the most healing paradigms there are for doing it. And it so happened, too, that one of the great things about the modern movement is therapeutic use has informed recreational use. We are sitting around the campfire talking about intention, whereas like I don't really remember doing that in 1988 in Alpine Valley and the Grateful. I don't really think we were doing that, but we are now. Even if it's just a bunch of brothers and sisters getting together and we're doing a little ceremony together, that's intention. And so I do think one movement is informing the other, and we can all work it out. Yeah. There's this. She had her hand up way up here.
Hi, Zach.
Hey.
Thank you for your psychedelic service.
Yeah.
I am interested to hear your thoughts on the similarities and differences in clarity and self-actualization that occurs in a psychedelic trip and then in somebody's decision to go into recovery from substances. Myself, I haven't had a psychedelic trip in probably over 6 years now, but I'm recently about 5 months sober from alcohol. And I noticed so many similarities about the surrendering, the giving it up, but one of the main differences I find is this idea that God is not me in 12 steps in recovery, and I think that's a big difference compared to psychedelics, and so I'm just interested if you have any other thoughts of similarities or differences.
Well, thank you for the question, and it's I could literally give a whole lecture on that topic, because I am a recovering addict, and I do have great reverence for the 12-step community still to this day, in spite of their rigid sort of dogmatic approach to integrating other substances, Yeah, and it's really complicated. Look, and one thing we can say, just to kind of kick it off and add some levity to it, Bill Wilson did LSD 6 times, and thought it was going to be the cure for alcoholism, right? And his wife kind of pulled him aside and was like, "Hey, Bill, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to work out long term. Maybe we should just put the lid on it." But there's some wonderful correspondence between his therapist, Humphrey Osmond, who's the inventor of coined the word psychedelic, and there's some wonderful correspondence between Bill W. and Tim Leary at Harvard, and really explores these issues. A huge part of 12-step dogma around this issue is really because it's twofold. One, there is a lot of fear, and one, look, we have to face it. Substance abuse is can be a life or death situation for a lot of people. So, and because of that, they really just err on the side of caution, right? But I personally, I took a long abstinent break from psychedelics as well, but when I reintroduced them to my life, to me it was like the living embodiment of the 3rd and 11th steps. It is 11th step work full on, For those of you who don't know what the 11th step is, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with the God of our understanding, praying only for his will for us and the power to carry that out. If I can't think of psychedelics as a better method for that, and there's a lot of more kind of below the belt jabs I could give to the 12-step culture around it, but in the same token, I see a lot of people really changing their minds. I have a lot of friends in the 12-step community who are very aware of what I do and ask me questions and are starting to kind of soften a little bit. Yeah, and it's a complicated question and a long one to answer, because I do think everybody's different, and I do believe that the fragility around newly clean and sober people is a very tenuous one, and I don't think that, hey, if you're coming off a 10-year crack and heroin run and you got 30 days and you're rushing to Peru, maybe not, maybe it's not quite right yet, but there may be a time when it could be right. So it's not an if, it's a when, kind of thing. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Hi, Hi Zach. I'd like to ask a bit more of a personal question. Really hope it is okay. Do you remember when you came to realize the role your father played in American history, and how this realization informed you or formed you as a person?
I do remember. For quite a long time, I'd say probably until about the age of 12, I had no idea why my father was famous. I had no idea. It's like, he's not on TV, he's not in the movies, why is he famous, We'd go to a lot of baseball games and Los Angeles Dodgers in LA, and people would ask him for his autograph and all the time. And my teachers and school teachers were especially like, they were either like thrilled he was coming to pick me up or really pissed off. It was one of the two, you know. And I couldn't quite figure it out. I was like, what is happening? This is weird. And I probably around the age of 12, he kind of now and then did some bit acting parts in movies and really small little roles, just kind of B-movie comedy stuff. And I went with him to go to the set of a movie, and I'm just like 12 years old. I'm standing on the movie set. I thought it was so cool. I'm just standing around watching them make the movie, and some lighting guy or a grip, whatever, is standing right next to me, and I'm just this little kid. And he said, I can't believe they let this evil man, Timothy Leary, in this movie. And I'm just like, wow, whoa, wow. And on the car ride home, I asked him, I was like, yeah, Timmy, what's up? What's up with that? Yeah, he tried his best to explain it to a 12-year-old mind, and I couldn't grasp much of it. But yeah, from kind of that point on, then I started to kind of put the pieces together. But at age late 14, going into 15, I became a deadhead, and the wheels fell off, and then I got into his work, and yeah, couldn't be more proud.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Anyone else have any questions? One more? Maybe one or two more? Or let's see.
Okay. Whatever you want.
You mentioned earlier the idea of sort of baby steps in human evolution, and curious your take on government in society and how the FDA and these organizations, what your take is on are they serving, are they hindering? Regulations, are they serving, are they hindering? I believe these organizations can be a manifestation of our own trauma when we're turning towards authorities to try to solve problems. I'm just curious your take on government and how we can perhaps transcend through our own healing to create the next level of evolution, which is one based on full trust and harmony, rather than turning towards that authority organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, we have never, with the exception of a very few singular moments in time, like the American Revolution maybe, or the French Revolution or something, we don't turn to government for leadership. And if we do, I think we're making a grave mistake, The government follows. They don't lead. You look at issues, it's a good example, gay marriage, for instance, right? You had a lot of politicians, even people like Elizabeth Warren or Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders were publicly, I don't know if we're ready for gay marriage yet. The second the polling data said, the majority of Americans support gay marriage, they were like, I'm for it, So government follows. So I don't think we should be looking to government for leadership. We shouldn't be looking for government for the stamp of approval on how we're going to, whether or not we should be given the permission to change our consciousness as we see fit. That's why I really don't pay much attention, and a lot of people get really offended by this, but I really don't pay much attention to whether or not you are a licensed whatever it is serving medicine, or if you're not. It doesn't matter to me. It matters to the person, whether or not they've done the work, where their heart's at, where they are in their own hero's journey, whether or not the government has given them a sign-off to do this medicine work or not. It personally, for me, is like, it laughs in the face of nature, right? We can't control nature. We can't control consciousness. We can't control our relationship or our thirst or our hunger for how we want to change our own consciousness, right? You know, on the other hand, when you look at something at, say, like the mission that MAPS does, which has been a 30-year odyssey that cost $100 million to get the FDA to take one medication through the clinical trial process to treat one condition, PTSD. It was a tremendous act in patience and the very embodiment of a necessary evil. Because what it has done, although I don't recommend that any of us, like, it shouldn't matter or inform your decision on whether or not you're going to use these medicines or not. But what that has done, it did change the minds of people whose minds that we couldn't change without going through that process. Like, former Governor Rick Perry is out there stumping for PTSD treatment. Rick Perry! Like, what the fuck? What kind of bizarro world are we living in, you know? It's crazy. So, and that is because of kind of this enmeshment with the bureaucracy. So I live in both camps, you know? I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I believe that everybody in here has the power of their own informed consent and should pay no attention to the legality or illegality. Look, don't buy drugs and sell them here on the property. But other than that, you know, do your thing. You know, on the other hand, I also have seen firsthand the importance in policy shifts and what that does to the culture for people who are not you and me, you know. We're already on the bus. If you're already on the bus, you're already on the bus. You can't get off. But for the people who aren't on the bus, you know, that's the world they're trapped in. Let's serve them too. So it goes both ways. All right, guys.
We good?
Yeah.
One more? I think you had a question. Let's do one more. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Hey, I just related a lot to what you're saying about when you're younger having a easier time letting it fly on like a macro dose level.
Yeah.
And I find myself these days kind of not, I get kind of cold feet on exceeding a certain dose when I'm looking to, I guess, ceremoniously engage. And I was just curious, like, what is your experience or opinion? It almost feels like it's like my responsibility, or I should be pushing myself, and I'm just kind of curious on your experience or opinion between like I'd say a light macro dose versus like a hero dose, or just your opinion on pushing yourself under the right circumstances when it comes to macro dosing, or psilocybin specifically.
Well, have you never done a heroic dose of psilocybin?
As earlier on, yeah, I'd say I've had I would easily do it, and I'm experienced with like ayahuasca and things like that.
So you have done a heroic dose somewhere? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd say so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky line to walk because I'm very careful about giving advice, you know, about especially around matters like that of high doses that, you know, are not for the faint of heart. It's tough work. It is. If you are considering it and you do have a lot of fears and apprehension coming up around it, I suggest that you find someone who is experienced and has a little expertise in this area, and you kind of, you know, get with them and talk to them about it and have them kind of unravel where your apprehension, where your fears, where your anxiety kind of is pinpointed, and seeing what's holding you back from taking that leap, you know. And yeah, just stepping outside of yourself and talking about it with someone else. Maybe if it's a facilitator or an integration expert, you know, I don't know, someone like that, you know, and just kind of really finding where your origin story is around what's stopping you from making that leap, you know. You know, if assuming there are no underlying, you know, serious mental health conditions, schizophrenia, bipolar 1 or 2, or things like that, and you don't really qualify for any one of those things, you know, start kind of creating a blueprint for how you might want to kind of do this, you know, where you want to do this, who you might want to do it with can help sort of alleviate some of the variables that could get in the way of shit unraveling. You know. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much again. Just a reminder, I threw the card, but you can get one over there. My course starts again on December 6th, and 10% off, and that 10% goes to support Psychedelic Society of Texas. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you all. Namaste.
Thank you, Zach, so much. Let's give it up again for him. Thank you. Just a quick reminder that follow us on Instagram. What else? We got events. Look at our newsletter. We got one here next week. Got a bunch of online things. And yeah, just really appreciate you all coming and being here. We can hang out for another half an hour or so. So feel free if you want to ask Zach a couple questions and just meet friends here. So appreciate you all. Thank you.